Hello and welcome to the Calm Within the Storm podcast, all about the journey of finding contentment within the chaos that is mental health.
Everything can change, even the world we live in.
This episode will be all about overworking and hitting burnout. And today I am joined by Marc Gallagher. And Marc Gallagher is a full-time musician and I think has more right than most people to talk about this subject because Marc is probably one of the busiest performers I've ever met in the whole world. Like an example of this, I think, was it a few years ago, you set yourself a challenge of doing a gig every day of the year.
Yes, it was 2016 and called it The Streak, #TheStreakLives, where I would do a gig a day, every day, no days off.
And how far did you manage?
I got to gig 100, day 86.
Madness. But the thing is, like, you set yourself a challenge to do that, but even now in your normal life, you're really not doing that much different than that challenge anyway. Like, you're out most days of the week.
Yeah, so like, whereas before it was just like a challenge of like, go out and perform every single day, like at open mics, on radio stations, or what have you, in whatever way I could manage. This time it's just like in my full-time gigging schedule, I just find myself playing about 5-7 times a week. My personal best was probably start of September actually. I did 13 gigs in a single calendar week.
That's just ridiculous. A very experienced overworker. So in approach to today's topic, I thought I'd put a few polls and questions out to the general public, all about overworking and hitting burnout. And I just want to get started by reading the first statistic of this poll. So I asked people, how often would you say you're guilty of overworking and hitting burnout? Mm-hmm. And the options were extremely frequently, fairly frequently / sometimes, not very often, and never. And I was really surprised by the results because extremely frequently was by a large margin the top answer. And I'm talking over 50% of people have extremely frequently hit burnout and find themselves overworked, which is ridiculous because we just don't know when to stop. And we need to learn because we can't all keep doing this to ourselves. So we had extremely frequently came in at 53%, fairly frequently 32%, not very often 12%, and never, only 3% of people have never hit burnout. Isn't that madness?
It is, but it's also not that surprising, I don't think.
Do you think? I find that really quite surprising.
I think in terms of overworking, especially in recent years, without getting too political, due to the various strains that we have under things like cost of living, things like austerity measures over the as a result, everyone has had to really stretch themselves to try and stay afloat. Outside of myself, my mother has 5 jobs and she goes between these 5 jobs, and as of the last, I want to say 6 months, it's like, what have you got on? And she'll go, oh yeah, so I've got a shift at Sainsbury's for like 6 hours, and then she'll go and be a security at a wedding until like 2 a.m. So I think that's a large reason for it. The people who have never hit burnout, they're either incredibly good at time management, or they are just incredibly lucky, incredibly privileged to be well off where they don't need to stretch themselves so thin, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. I personally feel like I've been on a bit of a journey with this over the past, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years, because I think I used to be extremely, extremely prone to burnout all the time. So I think I was a bit like you in that I was gigging most days of the week, and if I wasn't gigging, then I was working on admin for like 12 hours a day. And I'm still very guilty of doing that now. But then, well, as you know, I lost my dad during the pandemic, and that for me was like a humongous wake-up call, because I was like, what are you doing with your life? You are absolutely wasting your life by just being miserable all the time. And at that point, I kind of had like this whole realization moment of that I need to start doing things differently. And now I'm so much better at managing my time and my work that I haven't had a burnout in actually a few months now, or maybe even like a year, which is for me madness, because I was every few months I was just down and exhausted. Having that mindset switch has been like a massive thing, but we can't all have that, and I wouldn't be here without that horrible experience, you know? But I thought that was an interesting thing to start on. And I think, speaking of work, I think it's also important that we kind of identify the line of how much of it we enjoy and how much we do for work. Especially with music. Music's a tough one because music is a hobby and music is also work. And where is that line drawn? It's tough, isn't it? I think it's such a hazy line.
It is indeed a hobby. It's meant to be, like, when it is a job, it's a fun job. Ideally, that's the whole reason people go into it. They love it and they want to monetize their passion. If you're playing music you don't really enjoy playing, if you're playing music that you play too much so that you are sick of, if you play music that you don't really have much of an interest to begin with, if it's appeasing clients and not your own artistic interests. And then there are other factors around the gigs, such as how far away you're traveling. I know that I might be a bit, for lack of a better phrase, grumpier if I'm going to be doing a gig where I have to drive 5 hours for.
I agree.
So if it's factors like that, how well treated you are at the gig by staff, by your clients, the line it comes between if it's in your artistic interests versus what the client necessarily wants. And when those overlap, it's really fun. Where they don't, and you feel like you are working for your client at the expense of yourself, that's where it can feel like work, can feel like a job.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way of wording it. With that in mind, I have another statistic for you.
Ooh.
Well, this is a statistic and also a bunch of responses, really, that I'd like to kind of go through with you and just kind of, talk in a bit more depth. So I asked people, where do you think your habit of overworking stems from? And the most common response was money worries and fear of loss of income or a reduction in work. And that's very, very valid.
That's absolutely my case. So the reason why I gig as much as I do, why I work as much as I do, and I take everything going, only turning something down if I am physically already booked to be somewhere else at the same time. The only reason, well, it's not the only reason, because I still love to perform, but money worries. I don't know when the next COVID is going to hit. I don't know when I'm going to break my leg and not be able to travel. The dreaded January blues are fast approaching, where during the first couple of months out of the year, a lot of music venues, a lot of pubs, they cut back on their budget because people go out less because they've spent all their money for Christmas. Generally speaking. So I am preparing for just a general turn down in gigs. The phrase I've heard about my approach to this at the moment is making hay while the sun is shining.
But then, and that's a really good phrase, but at the same time, I think especially when you're self-employed, you fall into the trap of that, in that you constantly give yourself this safety net out of fear that something might go wrong. But, I mean, bar COVID, for a lot of us, unless we're really, really unlucky, not many things really go that wrong. And we actually, if we sit back and we look at how much we've achieved in our work life, we're a lot more stable than we think we are. And I never thought in this sense so one thing that I actually did at the start of this year, which really helped me to stop me from booking in something every day of the week, because last week I had every day booked. Why can't I do that this week? What if I'm going to struggle if I don't do that this week? I actually mapped out my entire 12-month calendar, and I put in every booking and every piece of work that I had for the entire year, and then did a total cost of what I was earning per month from the bookings that I already had in. And then I could look through my calendar and go, okay, I'm already earning this in December, which is 12 months away. So I only need to take on this much amount of work in order to pay my bills and give myself a little bit more for enjoyment and savings. And if I wanted to take on more work, then to earn a bit more money and pay for other things, then I could. And for me, that was a massive, massive thing, because then I could almost step back from the overworking mindset and just go, actually, this is what you're already doing. You don't need to push yourself to do anything extra unless you want to.
No, that's an excellent approach. I think it's really fortunate that you were able to, at the start of the year, be able to map out as much work that you already have. Like, in my case, a lot of my work comes not last minute, but on short notice. I know that, like, for myself, if I was to January 1st try and put in everything I had booked in, I would be starkly. So I totally agree. Going back to like with the saving things and how prepared we are, I have it too. Like my Patreon, which I've had since the start of 2020, and I haven't spent a penny off that. I just left it as its thing to grow, and should my car break down, and be totaled, and I need another one, you know, I can dip into that. That's what I mean in terms of not necessarily like breaking a leg, but like when you have
unexpected expense.
Yes, yeah. So it's money issues, money worries. Absolutely, it's something that I can relate to hard as to why people overwork.
Yeah. I fully agree with that. But I at the same time, I don't know, even if you set yourself a goal for per week of like a minimum of what you need, and that need also caters for something that goes into a savings to cover any unexpected expenses. If you have like a minimum kind of foundation of what you need to earn, I think you kind of then can snap yourself out of the mindset of going, oh, well, I haven't earned as much as I did last week. And you're not comparing yourself to all of your previous selves, but you're comparing yourself just to your own, this is what I need.
Yeah.
So the next thing on the list was missed opportunities and FOMO, fear of missing out. And I get this as well, because especially when you're self-employed, if you don't have your phone with you and you don't have your emails and your social media and things like that, and like a gig opportunity comes up and you miss it, then you're kicking yourself. And so you're constantly working, your brain is constantly switched on to work mode, because you're constantly thinking about opportunities and kind of cursing yourself if you don't take these opportunities, even at the detriment of your own health and physical health and mental health.
I work with a lot of booking agents, and quite frequently you will see them post a Facebook status of, I need a musician for this date, time, fee, location, and within like 30 minutes or less, you'll then get an edit, this has now been covered, and it's that race to get there first, to get that booking. I really apply FOMO. I have massive FOMO, but I mainly apply it to like my social life. So for example, I was working a ukulele festival in Eastbourne this past weekend. So after the performances, I will habitually be the last one standing, out of no, I don't want to miss like interactions.
The third most common response we got was not being good enough or being deemed a failure. And again, I think this resonates with a lot of people, because if you're not pushing yourself to be the best you can be, and you're not taking on 7 gigs a week, or you're not working 10 jobs, then especially if you're in the habit of doing that for so long and then you don't do it, then it's almost like people are going to think bad of me. People are going to think I can't do this, or what if I believe myself I can't do this, and that you're not good enough.
For me, I have a terrible thing for thinking comparatively all the time, especially in creative fields, because as much as we are friends, you are also a competitor.
Yeah.
You know, in a way. I think, not competitively, however, I can be envious sometimes, because as happy as I am when you appear on TV, there is also a part of myself going, damn, why was that not me? Am I not good enough? Do I need to be showing how hard I work in these other areas to earn this same sort of opportunity of which you do.
Yeah, and actually, I think you touched on a really interesting point there, because I think there is a difference between thinking competitively and thinking comparatively. And they're both probably just as bad as each other in different ways.
Yep.
Thinking competitively is constantly that you need to outdo someone else. And thinking comparatively is that you're not as good as someone else. And both of those things are quite damaging to think like.
Yeah, agreed.
We also had the fear of becoming irrelevant and forgotten. In our career, that's very easily done because music is coming out on a almost minutely basis at the moment. And if you aren't keeping up with your social media, you're not constantly making people aware that you're still there, the fear is that you will be forgotten. And you're constantly having to be switched on, and your brain is just working overtime and overtime to keep up this facade of who you are.
When people talk about social media, I'm like, I try my best to post every day so that people know I exist as well.
And I think also, like, outside of our career, if you're a nurse or in an office job or anything like that, if you aren't always pushing yourself to work super hard, someone else will get that promotion, or someone else will get that employee of the month or something like that. And you feel like you have to be at the forefront in order to achieve.
I had a similar thing at an old job. I was terrified about being forgotten there, not from a work perspective, but like I remember working really hard in the social element. I wanted people to like me, and this is like some of my own issues, but like the amount of times that I would bring in like donuts or pizza or cake to try and win them over because I'm really worried that I didn't make an impact on people's lives.
Another one is not getting the results that you wanted or aimed for, which, again, very valid. I think if you're going to overwork, it's probably because you feel that you've underachieved and you've not done a good enough job. And then you're going to push yourself to the point that you then hit burnout.
I guess it's about the expectations we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
I'd look at something like streaming numbers, social media numbers as well, for instance. You know, you put so much effort in and money, especially, into writing, recording your song, sorting out promo, contacting these radio stations, building up hype and interest. And when you put all that effort in and then you find that your song has got 60 streams in a week.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay. And this goes back to thinking comparatively as well.
Yeah.
Okay, what about this other artist who got 10 times that? Why do my fans not like me? Why am I so... And then low the spiral goes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just pressure from yourself, but a few people also mentioned pressure within the work culture. So pressure from colleagues, pressure from bosses, pressure just within the work environment. But I can fully see that, because if you're in a call centre, say, where you get paid per sale that you make, you are constantly going to be working to try and outdo everybody there.
During COVID, I was a shelf stacker, and they would put us on timers for like the big trolleys of stuff we'd need to get out. And I remember there was an error with their system in which one of the things I had, it was like a full-on trolley, and there were only 2 minutes to do it. I know that's not what they were realistically asking of me. However, with like them just getting the data that said, you know, he's taken an hour to do this 2-minute task, I knew how like that reflected bad on me, and like that pressure that we have to outdo each other, how to outdo like people's expectations, and also like this recent trend of quiet quitting, which is, I'm glad to see the, lack of a better phrase, uprising with it, because for so long bosses and employers will try and encourage their staff to work above and beyond without necessarily paying as such. The term quiet quitting is referring to those who don't go above and beyond, who do what is in their job description. They don't take on other tasks for no pay. They don't arrive early and leave late for no overtime.
That leads quite nicely into the next point, which was a massive thing amongst the people that answered this poll, was saying no. And the fear of saying no and the guilt of saying no. And if you're a really, really polite person, or even like a shy person, or someone who doesn't do confrontation very well, that is an impossible task. And I feel like sometimes if you do say no, you really have to back it up with what you think is a really valid reason. Like, it feels really wrong to just say no because you don't want to do something. You have to make up some kind of excuse as to why you can't do it, even if it's not true.
It really struck me, a few years ago, there was a YouTuber who left the scene, and they posted a little update video a while later, and he said, I'm not coming back because I don't want to. And that really stuck with me because I don't want to is reason enough.
Valid.
It should be. I do hope that there will be times where I can, for gigs and for other things, just be able to go no because I don't want to, and that be enough.
Yeah.
I've had a gig offer for a certain day, and my typical approach is I'll only say no to something if I am booked to work elsewhere. That's the only reason why I will. So when I had this offer come through and it falls on the day where we're going to be having a Christmas party, I feel bad to say that as the honest reason of no, I want to have a social event with my friends one of the few times that I really can.
You're allowed to stop and you can't feel guilty for resting.
I guess it falls under not knowing the difference necessarily between having a well-earned day off versus being lazy. I've had it before where I will go, okay, so I know I've got a list of some things to do with varying levels of urgency. And, you know, I can think of like, okay, so I've got this thing where I could go and record some parts, and then I'll spend the day like watching Netflix and trying to know the balance of where is the line between a well-earned day off and rest versus laziness and the cultures.
I think you fall into that in a way though, because I think when you don't give yourself a rest day out of fear that I'm not going to be productive and I need to be productive, and if I'm not being productive then I'm doing it wrong and someone else is going to be better than me, by not giving yourself that day just to not be productive and just to relax, on the days then when you plan to be productive, you are counterproductive because your brain isn't focused and you're distracted by things and you're really trying to do this work, but Netflix is on and then you're scrolling through Facebook and you've got all of these, and then you're like, no, I need to work. And then 5 minutes into writing a Facebook post, you're then scrolling through Facebook again. And this is just because you haven't stopped and let your brain just
I guess it's
relax.
the issue with us as self-employed people, because we don't have that same schedule, at least not enforced on us by another party. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and also your work is a lot of social media as well.
Yes,
so
it's,
where's the line?
Yeah, so it's that sort of thing. Well, really, if you're self-employed, you should just get a real job. That's the clear answer. But I think it should be normalised more among self-employed people that we have a day off, in the sense of, you know, for example, Tuesdays are typically the day of the week where I don't have any gigs that fall on. Maybe we should, like, at least in my case, I should start setting my calendar as such that, you know, during gigging days, I might be doing admin during, say, the daytime of it, but I can just write Tuesdays, no, that's my day off, sort of thing. And that goes back to being able to say no and just, you know, having that be answer enough.
Yeah, and I also think that's quite hard when you've got a job that isn't like a scheduled job per se. So you're not just working 9 to 5. When your job is self-employment, or even I don't know, any other jobs that might fall into this kind of bracket where you can plan to have a day off and then something pops up. So someone could send you an email and go, okay, can you just work on this? Or I've had this opportunity come up, or, you know, something pops up. And you can't have a planned day off every week because every week is different.
Okay. I think another thing I was thinking of earlier was, I remember one of my tutors in uni who has his recording studio, and his recording studio is a separate complex from where he lives. And I remember one of my fellow students asked him, why don't you save on rent having that in your house? It's always there. And him saying, if I don't go to work, I never leave work.
Yeah.
I remember hearing of a guy who would, when he'd been working from home, but he would put on a tie as his way of going, I'm in work, and then when he's finished, tires off and he's done.
This is something that I do as well. So if I feel like I need to have my head screwed on a particular day, I call it my English teacher outfit. And I when I wake up, I put on my posh pants and a blouse, and I feel like I'm going to get the job done if I'm wearing actual office clothes.
It's a change that I made
pajamas.
recently over the last year or two, where my spare bedroom, beforehand, I would have my laptop in my bedroom, and I would have days where I would stick the laptop out and I'd be doing work from my bed, and then I'd find that the day would pass and I hadn't left my bed.
Yeah.
And so I've had it now where, I've set up my spare bedroom as the office where I will go and I will get the work done.
Yeah.
Because then I can leave that, shut the door, computer's off, and then I'm back to my time off in the day.
Yeah.
Even though we'll always have our niggling things on our phone, if we get an email, but still, there is an element of separation there.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that with this room as well. When we moved into this house, I was like, I need to have a room. Because at the moment, I was working on the couch or from my bed or leisurely around the house. And I never had a room that felt like a work room and a life room. And when you're trying to relax in an evening and watch telly or have your tea, if I'm still sat in the same place where I was working, I'll be eating my tea, looking down at my laptop, and I never ever turn off. Whereas now I can put everything in this one room, and then if an email does come through on my phone, I'm like, okay, I'll just have my tea for now, and then I'll go back into my office and deal with it in office time. And you're right, having that separation is really, really important.
Yeah, if you never go to work, you never leave work.
Oh, smart, you see. So I'm going to move on to the impact that overworking and burnout has physically and mentally. So what it can do and what it does and what it will do on a long-term effect. And so I asked people, where do you notice the effects of burnout first? In your mental health or in your physical health? Because I think when people think of stress, you automatically think of it as being a mental thing. You get flustered and panicky and angry and agitated. But actually, I think there can come a point where when you're overworking and in the routine of overworking, you don't even acknowledge that your brain is stressed until your body starts showing you the signs that you're stressed. So I asked people this, and 75% of people said their mental health is the first thing that they notice, but 25% of people said it impacts their body. And I've had a few people actually share the impact that it had on them physically, mostly. Somebody actually mentioned that they ended up with a collapsed lung, which that's pretty extreme. That's crazy. But it's true, because if we don't know when to stop, suddenly everything can just spiral out of control and you don't even realise that it's happening. So somebody else said that they have fibromyalgia, and this can be really affected by their mental health. So when their mental health dips, so does their body health, which I think is a really important thing, because if you've got anything that's an underlying condition, you notice in that condition especially when your stress levels go up. Because I find this with my diet or things like that, because I have a few dietary requirements now. I notice them change as soon as I start to get stressed. I can't eat certain foods, or I have reactions to things, and I never used to get that. And that happened as a result of a burnout. I really got in a bad place, and long-term impact has been a massive thing for me. My dietary requirements now have been really bad for 2 years as a result of stress. And someone else said they had to stay off work recently because burnout made them physically ill. We don't listen to our bodies enough.
I remember watching the film Elvis and like him being diagnosed with exhaustion and me thinking, I don't know if like I've ever had that sort of thing, but like I will find myself in terms of underlying conditions. I've got sleep apnea, so it can manifest in just exhaustion, being tired all the time. I've had some RSI, repetitive strain injury in my wrist from strumming a lot. So I can't say that I've had like full-on physical effects, but maybe that's just a case of me not noticing it because I'm considering it under something else.
Yeah, so. I was very much a mental struggler for a long, long time. But then for me, I don't listen to my body. And I'm constantly thinking, but I need to do this. This is a deadline. I need to do this. Like everything in my mind is urgent. And I don't have that line of, stop, Sam. I don't have that until it gets to a point where my body absolutely cannot cope with it anymore.
As for listening to the body, I know it's not necessarily to like be overworking, but on Saturday I'd had breakfast at like 8 o'clock and then it's about 2 and I'm hungry and I'm thinking to myself, do I save myself for dinner at 6? And there's also, just because I've got issues with my body from a self-love perspective, I hate my body, I don't like being fat, and I want to change that. So there's the part of me going, I'm feeling hungry, and that's, I don't like that feeling, but also maybe the hunger's good because it means I'm going to like start getting thinner. Like that's the way I was approaching it, and going back to listening to your body, just said, if you're feeling hungry, that is your body saying, it's time to eat.
Mm-hmm. But for something like that, that's a very easy thing to identify. Whereas if we're getting a headache or something like that, why don't we go, okay, this is my body telling me I need to stop? We don't.
No, we just take a paracetamol and then just...
we carry on. And this is where I think we need to identify the root of the problem, because at what point do we see the snowball starting to form, Yeah. And it's hard as well, I think. Like, with my experience, I think I shrugged it off and kind of pretended it wasn't there until it got to a point where I was in hospital. And at that point, I was like, okay, something needs to change now. And that was a big wake-up call. But I think it's one thing that we're really, really guilty of is just putting symptoms aside because our work is more important. But if we got sacked tomorrow and had to get a different job, they're not going to care. Like, you are just a number to a lot of companies, and your health is far more important. Like, when I lost my dad, that was the most important thing. Like, I don't care about work. Life in that moment was the biggest thing for me, and happiness and health was all I cared about. And I was like, what am I doing to myself? This is far more important than any work, any income.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. With the just a number thing, I've seen people say they've had a colleague die, and the speed with which a replacement is sourced and how expendable you are to a lot of companies. So agree with that completely, and it's finding that value outside of a dollar sign, outside of other, it's the intangible things like our happiness.
Yeah. And I think that begs the question, is overworking worth it? Like, what do we get back as a result of overworking that is really worth the expense of our mental health and our physical health? Like, from overworking, have you ever seen a reward that is so epically life-changing that it was worth jeopardizing your health or your mental health for?
I do my overworking out of a perceived necessity, often from financial pressure imposed by the state, imposed by the current state of our country, imposed by my own pressures and worries and anxieties of the instability of our economy and everything around that. So I think, as you pose the question now, I cannot think of any immediate examples of which my overworking had directly led to something like a massive gig. If I was to really think about it, actually no, I've got a great one. I was taking as many gigs as I could, and I can trace so much work down to one single thing, in which there was a bar that had searched for ukulele player in Manchester, and because of the niche I had carved out through all the work that I had done, that's what led me to that job, which led me to a bunch of others, which led me to a residency that I had for about half a year and still continues in a reduced capacity to this day. So now that you mentioned, there are some things, but there is nothing like astronomical that comes as a result of the overworking. It's motivated from anxiety about financials, and now I have, at this current moment, I have a relative stability financially. I look at my bank account and go, cool, I can afford this Starbucks. And during peak COVID, there were times where I was struggling to put petrol in my car. So it's recovering from that. Going back to, is it worth it? Obviously, no. I can't see the effects either way at the moment. I just know that I do overwork myself. I do need to take a break. I need to, now that I'm starting to get more comfortable, and now that I'm starting to future-proof myself out of society, as I mentioned with the Patreon, I should find myself in a position where I can start taking more time for myself, for my social life, and then eventually letting that translate into general increase of morale and my general health. But I still feel like while I'm still young and I can still get away with it, I'm still pursuing it for the time being. So,
But future-proofing, I think, is actually a really good way of wording that. Because I guess that's similar to what I mentioned earlier in having that overview of your year and what you need to do and what you want to do. But it's also, then you're securing yourself for the future, and you're not just living in the present all the time, because living in the present is what's stressful, I think, because you're constantly thinking day to day, like, can I afford tomorrow? Will I have friends tomorrow? Will I be able to do this? And knowing in advance, or as much in advance as your job allows, I suppose, that you're going to have the security of stability, and not just stability in your income, but also stability in, I know I've got a booking with a friend next month, so I've got my social box ticked off. And I've got a holiday booked in 2 months' time, so I know I'm going to have that ticked off. And having something in advance that you know is going to make you happy, but is also going to support you work-wise, I think that's a really good plan to have, because then you're preparing yourself for something that's not just today and tomorrow. You're looking in advance as to how you can be stable in many, many ways, as a person and as a work person, as an employee or as a boss or whatever your position is.
I find that interesting just because when you mentioned living in the present is so difficult, I think more people need to be present. It's slightly unrelated note, when you go to a concert and you're watching the whole thing mostly through a phone, that's an example of them trying to live in what's going to be the past. They're planning on looking at this thing later on. We never do. We always take the phone. So I think people need to be present more. So I disagree with you slightly in terms of...
It's a fine line, I think, because to an extent, yes, I think we do need to stop wasting all of our time constantly thinking about things in a year's time and next month and whatever, to an extent. But then at the same time, I think having the knowledge and the comfort that you don't need to think about next month and you don't need to think about next year because you've mapped things comfortably.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, because then having a plan that allows you to feel stable in the future allows you to be more present. And that's what I'm finding now, is that now that I know I've got all the work that I need to be able to pay my bills, I am suddenly a million times happier than I was a year ago, because now I'm spending my evenings with my partner and I'm sitting in front of a log burner watching our favourite movie. And nothing is better than that. I've realised as much as I love my job and I love my work, nothing about my job beats just spending time doing the things that I enjoy doing with the people that I enjoy doing it with. And I think future-proofing yourself without overworking yourself to get to that future plan, allows you to live more presently. Speaking of future-proofing, a final question that I asked everyone of the general public who was on my social media. I asked any tips for dealing with overworking. So going forward. And I actually had quite a few responses, so I'm going to run through them. And if there's anything that you think is going to jump out at you, then feel free to butt in. So we've had a suggestion, therapy and counselling. That's something that I've experienced.
I've had CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy for my depression, and I found from that I really benefit from something like scheduling. So allocating time for certain tasks, because as self-employed, there are so many constant things running along, and I benefit from that very much so, not just in work, but also in my social life, by allocating that time for yourself and for your friends.
Yeah, exactly. It's like identifying what works for you, and sometimes you don't notice that about yourself, and you need someone who does know that to be able to tell you that. And there's no shame in talking to someone about that. So quite relevantly, the second thing that I'd like to mention is be realistic with schedule loading. Someone suggested no more than 4 days on before taking a day off, which I think is a very good point. If your job allows it, not every job allows it, but allowing yourself a designated time off is important.
Like I said, Tuesday is typically the day of the week in which gigs don't happen for me. So that is, at the moment, it's just admin day where I can get through invoices or some various smaller things. But for the most part, it is acting as a day off, and it's something I'm probably going to enforce on myself as my day off for the most part.
Yeah, and on a similar note of just scheduling in general, we've had the suggestions of schedule breaks, and also split your day into 3, morning, afternoon and evening, and work and focus for 2 and chill for 1. I think that's a really good thing, but then it's getting out of that mindset of I'm not being productive if I'm not working, you know? That's the hardest thing.
Yeah, going back to like some of the stuff I looked at in my therapy was looking at, if you've got everything that needs to be done, just start write all down, and then start looking at them in terms of like their priority. Are they necessary things like tidying the house? Are they routine things like walking your dog, making sure the bins are out? And do they have certain times that and then you can plan your day according. But, you know, scheduling breaks, crucial, even in most day jobs.
Allowing tasks to end and not filling the hole immediately with another. I think that's a very, very, very good point. Because that's something I think a lot of us are very, very guilty of. I
benefit very much from a to-do list, and I get the satisfaction of physically crossing out the to-do list. But then once I found that it is somewhat empty, my then thought is, oh my gosh, right, I need to write another one now for this.
Yeah, absolutely. But speaking of to-do lists as well, something that is a really helpful tip is sometimes breaking down a to-do list into even smaller chunks. As in, I found recently, like, I had so many videos to edit, and I had various things to do, and I had this to-do list of like, edit this video, do this, build a website, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, these are all massive things, which in my head I'm like, I can do this. This is really easy. And then you sit down and you realise, editing a video is going to take me 6 hours. So what I ended up doing was I did a to-do list that said, do 10 minutes of video editing, 10 minutes of this, and as soon as I'd done that 10 minutes, I could then tick it off and still feel like I'd achieved something.
Nice.
Even though I hadn't finished the task, I was 10 minutes closer to finishing the task, and in my head I was achieving it.
I've got a good one. Tax return. January is approaching, end of January, and I'm going, balls, I need to really sort this. And then I wrote my to-do list out as not just tax return, because that is an enormous thing, but I wrote it out as all the months. And then all my accounts are through either PayPal, cash, or bank transfer. So it's going, okay, I can each month in
break
these
it down.
3 things. And then I can go, okay, today I'm going to do 2 months of my cash, in which I will be looking through all my paper receipts. And then I can cross those off. So very much in the sense of, okay, I've not done the whole thing, but I've done these steps close towards it. And that was absolutely vital to me in managing that overwhelm. So.
Yeah, me too. I found that one of the biggest helps for me. And someone else has also suggested not just to-do lists, but done lists.
Ah, that's
So
nice. I guess from my perspective, it's the it being crossed out.
There's something like really almost like mentally satisfying about having something to tick off and complete and write on a piece of paper. I think it's not quite the same as being digital. Having something that you can physically tick and write down that you've done is for me, so beneficial. So having a done list is probably really helpful in that I can write down what I've done and I can visualize it and I can see it.
Yeah.
And then we have managing others' expectations, which I think we've already really talked about, especially being in different work environments. Mindfulness and meditation. Do you ever do any of these?
In mid-2018, when I learned about my depression, I did do Headspace for a bit. My issue was I wasn't able to make it into a routine.
Yeah.
When I did
That's the hardest part.
Yeah, when I did it, I loved it. But my issue was I needed to set my routine of, okay, so I wake up, I have a shower, Headspace, eat breakfast, that sort of thing. Because I didn't have the discipline enough to make it into a routine, I wasn't able to. But whenever I have done mindfulness, when I have meditated, I've found it really wonderful.
Yeah. We tried to get into the routine of waking up and doing yoga for the first thing before doing breakfast or anything else, doing 10 minutes of yoga a day. And we started to get into the routine of it, and it did make us feel so much more awake and so much more productive. And then something happens, like you get an urgent email through in the morning and you're instantly snapped back out of that routine. Routine is the hardest thing to master. Mm-hmm. Someone said removing time wasters and distractions. If you are really scheduling your day well and removing all of the time wasters and procrastinating and everything else, you are gonna get so much more work done in that time that then you can relax and you can enjoy your afternoon or your evening if you take away all of that will encourage you to procrastinate. Keeping your phone and laptop in a different room, and also having a separate work phone and a separate work email. For us, a lot of our work comes into our personal life as well because it's on our Facebook and we get it through, friends recommending us and things like that. But if you've got a job that isn't necessarily a hobby or part of your social life, like all of our friends are musicians, so naturally our work is very hazy where the line is.
But it does definitely have its benefits.
So this one made me laugh. Someone said, don't become a nurse. If you don't want to overwork, don't become a nurse.
Oh, okay. I was I didn't, normally I take things really literally. However, I was thinking, do they mean, metaphorically, don't look after others? Don't put others before yourself? That's more the direction that I thought they were going in. But no, nurses work incredibly hard for not enough money or credit.
Absolutely. Another funny one that just made me laugh. They just ended their message saying, honestly, I've no idea. And I think that's how we all kind of feel most of the time.
Yeah.
How do I do it?
At least, I guess, through this, we've got some ideas without necessarily having the answers. We're able to kind of start identifying some problems, some root causes, and then we've got a starting point at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a nice way to end it. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been really nice to chat. Thank you.
It has. Thank you very much. I hope you found some value and comfort and reassurance in anything that we've talked about today. Let me tell you what we've got coming up next. In the next episode of the Calm Within the Storm podcast, we'll be talking all about therapy, counselling and seeking professional support. And I'll be joined by Sarah Gregson. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!
Everything can change.